Note, this video is part of a larger series on speed solving the FTO. Click the playlist link in the description to see the rest of the videos. It's time to talk about now my actual solving method. This first video will cover the first step of the solution, which is solving your first center, and techniques to do it well and efficiently. Having a good start to your solve is extremely important for FTO in particular because it will allow you to flow into your other steps much better and give you a better scope for what to prepare for as you continue. Let's now go over 3 things that you should be thinking about before you even start solving your first center, which are inspection, move count efficiency, and ergonomics. With regards to move count, you should be aiming for under 10 moves every single time and on average around 7 or 8 moves. Casey Mihalo recently showed that any scramble always has a first center which can be solved in 7 moves or less. And he believes that it also doesn't matter which color you're looking at because since the center can be built on any of 4 faces, it shouldn't really make a difference. So basically, any center should be solvable in 7 or 8 moves every single time. So if you're getting move counts over that, you may need to think about improving your efficiency. Now let's talk about what inspection for the first center should look like. In general, you should be able to find the entire first center solution most of the time. In certain cases, there are really difficult scrambles that come up, but pretty much every time you get a scramble on FTO, you'll usually see a pair with an edge and a triangle somewhere with your first center pieces. In my case, that's white. Of course, you may have a different color scheme, but the idea is the same. And in general, that's what you should look for. You should look for these sort of pairs. If you don't have any, then see if there are any moves that will form a pair very easily. So if you're one move away from a pair. For example, let's say that this pair didn't exist down here. We do have this white triangle and this edge over here. So a single move would be able to form a pair, as you can see like this. Once you inspect where your pairs are going to be, you then want to be able to know how to bring them together to form the trapezoids. For the purposes of the rest of these videos, I'm actually just going to call them traps for short because it's just faster to say it. As an example, on this scramble here, we had this pair at the very beginning, and so I was tracking this pair and also this edge over here. On my color scheme, this pair and this edge can be brought together to form a large trap in only 2 moves. And that would be F prime R, and it will form it up here. As you can see, this works just fine. So being able to inspect into your traps is very important as it will basically form the basis for how you're going to finish this center in the first place. The next thing to inspect for after you have a trap figured out, or some sort of pair I guess, is to look at your other lone triangle pieces that are going to be in the center. So for example, this triangle piece over here, this triangle piece over here. And you also want to think about that last edge piece too. Essentially, when you complete your large trap, or even your first trap, where are your other pieces going to be? And you want to be able to figure this out in the inspection time, because if you know where the rest of the pieces are going to be after you complete your first major block of pieces, then you can just go straight into finishing those other pieces, forming their block, and then bringing everything together to finish the center. So once again, in terms of inspection, the first thing to look for is pairs, and then your traps, and then your remaining lone pieces that are going to be used for the next trap or block, and then the last moves that you would need to do to bring all of it together. If you can't see that far into the inspection yet, don't worry. With more practice, this does become much easier. Like I've definitely said many times before, this puzzle is quite different from most other puzzles, and it takes some getting used to. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to practicing and getting a feel for it. Now, let's go over some block building styles and examples that I like to use in my solves and that others have found that work really well too. As mentioned before, it's possible to form your traps by creating pairs with an edge and a triangle and bringing them together with either another edge piece for a large trap, as you can see here, or with another triangle piece to make a small trap, as you can see here. Now, one thing that is interesting to note is that slice moves are actually almost never needed for creating these trapezoids or pairs. And that's because they can always be simplified to simple outer block turns. So, for example, I did that slice move to bring this pair down with this triangle. But in reality, this is really just an outer block turn of this face, as you can see, that will achieve exactly the same thing anyway. Now, on the other hand, sometimes slice moves can be ergonomically more friendly and make the execution a little bit faster. For example, in this case, I have this pair over here and this triangle, and I'm going to need to match this up with this edge to make the large trap. And in this case, it's going to be a little bit easier and faster to actually do a slice turn to form this. And that way we can bring it directly up to the top like that instead of having to rotate the puzzle and do a U move there. It's also important to keep in mind when doing all of this block building to try to use as little puzzle rotations as possible, because puzzle rotations can make you lose track of things pretty easily, and ultimately they disrupt the flow of your turning. Now, while most of the time it's not possible to completely eliminate rotations, of course, it is definitely helpful to reduce them so that you reduce the amount of wasted time that you get from it. When you're completing the first center, there's really no right or wrong way to hold a puzzle as you form all of your pairs and traps. But keeping in mind that most of the moves that you do on the FTO are U and R moves and maybe even F moves, it's best to hold the puzzle so that all of the moves that you're going to be doing are going to be on those easy faces to turn. In other words, picking the right orientation to start off your solve is definitely important and something to consider too. Okay, let's take a look at this scramble, for example. So I see that I have this pair right here. Here's one of my white edges, and here's the other white edge over here. And this also has a pair formed with it. In order to get my color scheme correct, I'm going to have to bring this pair next to this edge over here. So clearly I don't want to hold the puzzle like this, right? Because that's going to be really awkward to somehow execute that and be very unfinger friendly. So in this case, I can see that there are going to be two moves that I need to use to bring this pair up next to this edge on this side. And from this angle here, that is R, F prime. Or from this angle here, it is U, R prime, which is very, very ergonomically friendly. And so I would choose this orientation when I start off my solve. And you can see that's very fast to do. And it also allows me to track that white triangle because since doing those moves, I would be able to have it end up on a face that I was still looking at. And so therefore, I could then immediately know where this white triangle is. I'm looking directly at it. And keeping in mind that the edge is over here, I could then do an L prime move and then form this pair over here. And then rotating this way to this position, I would then be able to finish the rest of this center off completely without any more rotations or regrips. Because from here, I can do R and U moves to finish this small trap. I can bring this white triangle in like this, and then match it up with the other trap with an L prime like that. So you can see that those ergonomics worked really nicely, and it was a way to sort of reduce the number of rotations and regrips that I was doing, which helps shorten the solution. So there you go. That's just a quick example of how you sort of want to really go about solving your first center. You know, forming those pairs and your traps, using good ergonomics, and having good grip to transition to the next steps much more easily. Now let's talk about something that you don't really ever want to have happen, but of course it can, and that is wrong color schemes. So if you take a look here, we have this white center done, but it's not actually done. With my color scheme, this is incorrect. These two edges would have to swap places for this color scheme to be correct on this first center. So this is not correct. So this is not good. If I were to continue from here, then the puzzle would actually not be solvable. So the question is, how do we fix a wrong color scheme? And how do we avoid falling into this sort of trap? So first, fixing one is actually pretty easy to do. If you have a situation where you have most of your pairs and traps already completed, kind of like what I have here, then you can sort of refocus your perspective a little bit differently. So, for example, we can see that this right here is a small trap and this right here is a large trap. So we can look at it from this perspective of this small trap and say, well, this small trap really needs to be next to this edge instead of this edge, right? So what we could do to fix this is move the small trap out of the way, reposition that correct edge, and then bring it back in. So now doing this now puts it next to its proper edge, and now this color scheme is correct, which is great. So from here we could then go ahead and finish and go ahead and fix that center. So now here is a correct color scheme. Okay, here's another example of a scramble, and we can see that we have this pair right here and this edge right here. And this looks really nice, right? We would be able to bring this pair up next to this edge with two moves. and then we would be able to form a large trap. But we don't want to fall into this trap. No pun intended. Again, the issue here is that we would get a wrong color scheme. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we don't actually want to complete this trap. If we do that, then we're basically set to finish the rest of the center incorrectly as well. So we want to avoid these situations. When you're inspecting the scramble, you want to make sure that the trap that you are planning to form is of the correct color scheme. Now, with small traps, this doesn't matter too much because it's only featuring one edge piece. But if you're looking at a large trap, you need to make sure that the two edges that it's going to contain are going to make a correct color scheme when you finish it. So what should we do here? Well, instead of focusing on that large trap, we could look around and see if we can find a different large trap that we could form instead. And there's actually a couple of options here. A really nice one actually that I can see is with this edge, this triangle, and this edge. So notice that we have this pair right here. Well, we're going to actually break this apart to then make a pair with this edge. Then this edge will have a pair, and then we can bring that together to match with now this edge piece, and we will have a correct color scheme on this large trap solution. So that's going to look like this, forming this pair, then turning this edge into position and bringing the pair into place. And actually, the rest of this first center solution is very easy and quick. So I hope some of that also illustrated that it's okay to break apart some pairs that you have if the pairs lead to bad traps that are incorrect color schemes. You can also exchange certain triangles with other identically colored triangles. So there's a lot of freedom that you have with this. So definitely try to experiment, and that is honestly my best recommendation. Experiment with the puzzle, see what kinds of things you can do with these pairs, with these trapezoids, and you will build a better intuition for how this first center comes together at the start. Alright, so here's yet another scramble, and now I can show something else that's helpful to do sometimes. In this case, we already have a small trapezoid built, and we want to actually build the large trap second, instead of the small trap, because we already have it. So here we're going to look for the other pieces. So in this case, here's the white triangle, this white edge, and this white edge. Now, you might think that we can bring this white triangle up here, and then here's a pair, and now we can pair it with this edge, but the problem is, this actually creates a wrong color scheme, so we're going to have to deal with this somehow. So instead of pairing this triangle on the left-hand side of this edge, we're going to have to pair it to the left-hand side of this edge. Alternately, what we could do is pair this triangle on the right-hand side of this edge, and it would also work out okay. Now, that also might be tempting to do, but in this case, this is actually going to break apart the small trap, so we don't want to do that solution. Instead, the best solution here is to pair this triangle on the left-hand side of this edge piece. And in case you're wondering what happens if we pair it on the right-hand side of the edge, well, we're going to get an incorrect color scheme. So in other words, what I'm demonstrating here is that if you notice that pairing this triangle on a certain side of an edge is going to create a wrong color scheme when you form a large trap with it, then it either means you need to pair it on the other side of the same edge or on the same side of the different edge. So that's a little nice thing to remember. So let's go ahead and pair this triangle with this edge on that left-hand side, like this. And now we can form the large trap with these three moves. And now here's our large trap, and all of those moves preserved our small trap that we had at the beginning of the scramble. So we can finally finish by bringing the small trap together with this and complete the center. So there's an example of some more block building preservation strategies that we can do. Alright, so now I would like to go over a few specific cases that can come up which have some really nice solutions to them that are not obvious. Here's the first case. What we have here is we have this center almost completed, but we're missing this white triangle. But if you notice, this center actually has an incorrect color scheme, and this is not good. So the setup looks like this. We have this white triangle right underneath this slot right here. And the solution for this center is that fixes the color scheme and puts that triangle into place. A very nice sequence. Okay, so what do you do if your color scheme was actually correct? Well, this one's also actually pretty nice. We have just this white triangle that we need to insert into here to finish this center. Now what's cool is that all of the algorithms that you use throughout the entire solve, usually it's the flipping algorithms, right? Those can actually be used at any point during the solution, and they prove to be quite ergonomic, and so you can actually use them to really help you insert some pieces. So for example, we can actually insert this white triangle into this slot. We can orient the puzzle this way, then do a U prime to set this up, and now all we have to do to insert this triangle is actually a sledge algorithm. So again, that's this. And you can see now that this center is completed. Alright, here's another one that you might run into. So here we have all of the edges done, one triangle done, and we have two triangles now that need to be inserted. Now you might think that we could just do two sledges and assure that works, but this can also be done in a more ergonomic and faster way. In fact, a couple. This first solution is 8 moves, and it goes like this. This can also be done with U moves instead of U prime moves in the same way, like this. There is also another solution which is a little bit more efficient at 7 moves, but the ergonomics honestly aren't quite as nice, but it does still work. So we now hold the puzzle like this, and the sequence goes like this. If you don't like that alg, of course that's understandable, but I just want to share all the options that you really have here. And now for my last trick, I would like to show this case here that you might see sometimes. We have a pair with this edge and this triangle, and then there's another triangle that's just one position away from being correct. Now you might think that we can have to bring this down and then bring it back up to form that, but we can actually form this small trapezoid in only 2 moves, and it's like this. The logic for this is that this pair is effectively kind of like an arrow pointing this way. So since we have this chirality, we're going to do a D move to move it to the right where the arrow is pointing. And then this move to finish. If the arrow is pointing this way, then we're going to do a D prime move. Same idea. And if you want more ergonomic versions of that, it looks like this. Alrighty, this is one final scramble that I would like to show that will really try and hopefully bring all of the techniques together, or at least the conceptual idea behind everything. So we have this pair right here, this pair right here, and then we have this lone edge and this lone triangle. Now when you look at a scramble like this, there are lots of ways that we could build this first center. We could bring this pair up to here to form a large trap, and then try and finish off this small trap. But as you can see, this triangle isn't really going to be in a good spot for that, right? We'd have to move the triangle, then move this, and then form the pair, and it's a lot of moves. So let's not do that. Let's instead notice that what we have on this front face is that small trapezoid block building case that I showed earlier, where there's only 2 moves to build this small trap. And furthermore, we have this lone edge right here. So if we think about this, remember that solution, we can move this to the right and then move this down to form the small trap. But wouldn't it be nice if that other edge piece was here when we did that, because then we would have the large trap formed as well. So let's go back to what we had and think about that for a minute and realize that we can actually do this. We can do this setup move where we move this edge down here to the bottom, as you can see. Then we can do this small trap solution with the D move to set that up, and then an R prime is going to bring this triangle here to make the small trap. But you might notice that since we had this pair at the beginning here, if we do an R prime from here, then you can see it's going to form this large trap, and then it also forms this small trap at the same time. So that's incredibly efficient, only 3 moves to form both of these traps, and then finally we can finish off the center with 2 more moves to bring it all together. With first center, really, your possibilities are pretty much endless, and it will take a lot of practice to really hone down the optimal solutions for this step, and the best way to get better at it is just to experiment, honestly. In the inspection phase of the solve, everything there is presented to you. So use the inspection. Take the time to really plan out everything, even if you have to go over 15 seconds. Over time, you'll be able to gradually work that down to be able to inspect the whole first center within the 15 seconds of inspection. I can reliably do that about 90% of the time these days. Although there are some hard solutions that come up occasionally, which make it a little bit more difficult. But hey, you can't have everything perfect. Those are pretty much all of the techniques that I know and use for this first center. Of course, this is probably not all of them that exist. So feel free to play around and see if you can come up with some nice solutions as well. That's it for this video. Be sure to check out the others through the playlist link in the description.